Welcome to Science and the Mystical. Today is going to be an extra special day. We're going to talk about homeopathy and how it treats the vital force of an individual. So it doesn't really treat or diagnose a disease, condition, or disorder per se, but we do see that as the person heals, they come back into balance and symptoms disappear or lessen, which is fabulous news. Anke Zimmermann acts as a consultant and educator to those who wish to learn about homeopathy, have really difficult situations to deal with, and have found no answers. And she's a wonderful help to children, especially, which in return helps the families as well. So, Anke, it's absolutely wonderful to welcome you here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be on your program and to see you, of course. Thank you.
You're very welcome. We've had some wonderful conversations. It's when we get together, it's a lot of interesting conversation from beginning to end. So here we are, and I'm really happy to share all your knowledge and experience, expertise with those who are listening. So yay.
Oh, yes, thank you. I'm very excited about it too.
Good. So let's just jump right into homeopathy in a nutshell.
Okay, so homeopathy is an alternative or complementary system of healing, which has been around for about 200 years. There's a fascinating background story. I'll just tell you a little story about it. Homeopathy was developed by a German medical doctor named Samuel Hahnemann. And he was trained as a conventional doctor, but got married very shortly after he finished his training and had a lot of kids. He actually had 11 children altogether. And
Whoa.
this was back, 1770s or something, somewhere around there. And he very quickly realized that the methods he had learned in medical school couldn't be applied to his children. They were too drastic and invasive. So back in those days, things like bloodletting and the use of mercury compounds and things like this were mainstream medicine. And he realized this wasn't going to be what he wanted to do for his children. He felt that they needed a gentler type of medicine. For the next 20 years, he basically opted out of medicine and instead translated and wrote books. And he was fluent in 7 or 8 different languages and translated many scientific works from different languages to German and vice versa. And in the process, got some ideas which led him to homeopathy, essentially, including that a substance that might cause symptoms in a healthy person could potentially be used to alleviate similar symptoms in somebody who already has them. I'll give you a little example. Think about cutting onions. Like if you have a nice strong onion and you're cutting it, as you know, the vapors will irritate your eyes and nose. And you may get a bit of a runny nose and your eyes might burn and so on. So if you already have symptoms like that, because, for example, you might have certain type of hay fever in the summer, that's like that, a homeopathic preparation of onion juice might relieve you within minutes.
Crazy.
I know, and I know it works for me because I've had hay fever from the time I was a child. And in the summer, if I get some allergy symptoms like that, I just take a few doses of Allium cepa, which is the Latin name for red onion. And in 3 minutes, I have a relief.
Amazing.
Yeah, so Hahnemann then experimented on himself and his family. Homeopathy is very interesting because we are not dealing with crude substances. So the onion juice, of course, onions are good for you in general. You can certainly eat them and make juice out of them and all of that. But the interesting thing about homeopathy is that remedies are prepared by a process of sequential dilution and agitation, so that in any remedy above C12, and I will explain in a moment what that means, essentially doesn't contain any of the original molecules. There's technically, if you analyze them in a lab, nothing in them.
So why it's disputed?
Well, that's right. That's why homeopathy is often considered a placebo effect or some other thing by certain aspects of conventional science. But we know it works, and there are thousands of studies on the effectiveness of homeopathy. But we don't have an exact mechanism of how it works. And in some scientific circles, the idea is, well, we don't know how it works, therefore it cannot work. Which isn't all that scientific, is it?
Not really.
No, just 1 second. Excuse my raspy voice. So in any case, homeopathy is a very successful form of medicine, and over 200 million people in the world are using it. And it has survived ongoing attacks for the last 200 years, which are still continuing. Oh, excuse me again. My voice is still waking up, but it's still going strong. So anyway, so several principles apply in homeopathy. One is like cures like, which means that a substance that can cause certain symptoms in a healthy person can be used to alleviate, balance, heal similar symptoms in somebody who already has those symptoms. The second part is that remedies are developed by a process of experimentation. So what Hahnemann did is he experimented on himself. He was taking a certain substance that was used for malaria, the bark of the cinchona tree, and made it into tea and kept drinking it. And after some time, he developed alternating fevers and chills and flu-like symptoms, which headaches, which were reminiscent of malaria. And he knew this was used to treat malaria, but he was actually getting symptoms similar to malaria when he was just taking the tea. So that's how the whole system of homeopathy started, essentially, by noticing which substances have which effects on a human being, and then using them if a person already had those symptoms. And Hahnemann then, he had a number of colleagues, and he also enrolled his entire family and friends, and they all started to do these experiments where they were taking certain things to see what would happen to them. And in addition, of course, we already know what some things do, like we know what the effect of, let's say, coffee are, or alcohol, or an arsenic, or the effects of bee stings or snake bites and so on. So there's a whole element of toxicology as well. We know what happens when a person gets bitten by a cobra, for example. And so this whole system then continued to develop. And now, fast forward 200 years, we have over 8,000 remedies, which we can use with great effect to alleviate and heal and rebalance almost anything you can imagine.
It's pretty amazing when you think of it. Those are a lot of remedies to choose from. Now, you are a classical homeopathist?
So classical means I was trained classically, and classical homeopathy refers to giving one remedy at a time for the whole person. The idea is that all the symptoms that a particular individual experiences could somehow trace back to an underlying energetic imbalance in the vital force. And if you give just the right remedy, that imbalance is being addressed and comes back into imbalance. And the person may have 10 different symptoms, but all of them may actually improve. Now, that works really well when somebody is relatively healthy. But it's not working so well nowadays because people have been exposed to so many environmental factors, mostly due to modern medicine, unfortunately, and as well as environmental toxins that have created additional layers and imprints on their vital force. And homeopathic, like constitutional remedies, remedies that are supposed to help the whole person, are for sure helpful. And I always try my best to find one. And when you find the right one, it can sometimes be absolutely almost miraculous. And, you know, I see those things on a regular basis in my practice, and I've experienced them in my own life as well. But my special interest, as you know, is with children who have developmental and behavioral challenges. And single constitutional remedies given maybe once a month or so are generally not enough to return those children to a point of balance.
So your job, as I remember from our conversations, is that you do a really extensive intake with these children, with the parents of these children, and you're dealing with the biology, the psychology, and perhaps the spirituality, their connection, their groundedness, and that all of that encompasses and informs the choices you'll make.
Yes, that's actually a very good description, better than I could have said. I wanted to just explain something about health and healing in general. The way I look at health and healing now is that it comes down to a couple of very basic things. Number one, enough energy in the system, not unlike, you know, we all have little cell phones and we charge them up, right? When the battery goes down, it gives you a warning. Oh, you're down to 20%, down to 10%, plug it in. Well, the little cell phone has to have enough battery juice in it for it to function, right? Okay, that's the same with us. We have to have enough energy coming in, or enough energy has to flow in the system. Number two, the energy has to flow in the correct directions, in the correct pathways. Just like in your little cell phone or in a computer, there are circuits in there, and the energy has to flow in there. Or it's like, you know, the electricity coming to your house. It comes from the power lines outside to your house, and from there it goes to some place where it gets rerouted to different parts of your house, so that your toaster and your, you know, your hairdryer and everything else gets power, your television. And if you blow a fuse, then maybe your toaster won't work. Okay. So in a human being, what we do with homeopathy essentially, with constitutional remedies, we can increase the amount of energy flow in the body.
So can I just ask a question?
Of course,
Because I can hear people asking. So
yeah.
Constitutional meaning foundational application.
Constitutional remedies mean it's a remedy for the whole individual, their physical, mental, emotional, all of those aspects. Okay.
Yes.
And yeah, it can include things like their chief complaint. Let's say the person comes in and they have migraine headaches. All right. And perhaps their migraines are, and then you ask a lot of details. Let's say they find out, we found the migraines tend to be worse in the afternoon, and they notice they start around 3 o'clock. Well, what else? Oh, they're on the right side of the head. What else? Oh, they're sensitive to light and noise. Okay, this is all useful information. What else? Tell me about the food and drinks you like. Oh, I really enjoy lemonade. I make lemonade every day. Oh, that's good. Interesting, right? What else? Tell me about your nature. Well, I can get angry easily under certain circumstances. Okay, what else? Well, I have dreams about wolves biting me. Okay, now we're into all right, so I look at all of those things, whereas in conventional medicine, while you have a headache, you take a Tylenol, right? You're done.
Done.
So in my case, we're looking for a much more comprehensive understanding of who that human being is, in order to find a remedy that matches their symptoms overall. It's not just a remedy for headaches. We don't have just one remedy for headaches. We have hundreds and hundreds. So that's what it is. A constitutional remedy is a remedy for the whole person, and that covers all their symptoms. But it doesn't always work like that. So to go back to the kids, and let me just mute this for a moment while I clear my. That's better. whatever I was going with this is, so number one, we have to have enough energy coming into the system. Okay. Number two, there could be blockages in the pathways, right? And that's not similar to Chinese medicine. The Chinese figured out thousands of years ago that we have energy meridians in the system, and they can improve and change the flow of energy with something like acupuncture needles. If there's too much flow in one, if there's a blockage in another. And homeopathy in many ways is similar, okay? So back to principles of health, enough energy in the system, and the energy has to flow correctly. Now, traumas, unresolved infections, injuries, emotional traumas, vaccinations, certain medications, all of those things can potentially create blockages in the energy or in the vital force of an individual. And if you're lucky and we can get enough energy flow with a constitutional remedy, these blockages might be washed away. Just like, we're living here in British Columbia. In the summer, everything dries out. You might have creeks that normally contain water. In the winter, they might be dry. In the summer, they might be dry. Some leaves and branches might fall in. That's not a problem. When the rain comes, everything gets washed away and into the ocean. Okay. But let's imagine a tree falls across the creek in the summer. Well, when the rains come, that tree isn't going to be able to be washed away. It's going to stay there, right? And that's the same with us. So some certain impacts on the human being that create blockages that may not be able to be resolved with a constitutional remedy. So we have to go in there with remedies that are more specific to that blockage and remove the blockage. And this is where things get really interesting. So the first 20 years of my life, I was pretty much just a classical prescriber. And I had great results. But things got more and more complicated, especially with the kids. I was seeing a lot more children with autism and much more complex, multi-layered, very complex, challenging health situations. And that is related to, as I mentioned, often medical interventions. So I started I read a book by a Dutch medical doctor named Tino Smits in 2011, which had just been published. And he was explaining how we can use remedies made from things like anesthesia, antibiotics, Tylenol, vaccines, plastics used in baby bottles, baby formula, pesticides, all kinds of things. And it was such a revelation for me. And overnight, my toolbox literally quadrupled in size.
Overwhelming?
It was so exciting because all of
Yay.
a sudden, I had way more tools and I understood what happened to these poor kids, because I was getting great results in general with children. Children have a good vital force. That's why homeopathy works great. Again, we just crank up the vital force a notch and things get washed away very easily in a child. In an adult, it can be a little more complex because our vital force tends to diminish a bit as we get older. But children heal very well. They're full of life. But these kids on the autism spectrum weren't necessarily getting better. And it really bothered me, okay? So then when I read Tinos's book, all of a sudden, I had all these additional tools. I had remedies. First of all, I also didn't think that vaccines were an issue up until that time, but now I know they are. And I use a lot of remedies made from vaccines in my practice, among other things, as well as remedies made from all these other substances and interventions. And that's been a complete game changer. You can't imagine how much more effective my management of these cases is now.
Amazing. And it makes sense. Life gets more complex as the planet evolves, as we evolve as individuals. And the impacts of the environment and what we put into our bodies, be it medicines, poisons, foods that are containing pesticides. Like it's a plethora of things that are interfering or interrupting that vital force. And I wanted to comment on one thing with regards to children. What I love about working with children, like we both have a huge passion for kids, and they're not in the way of their own process like adults would be. With adults, we have this discerning mind and this curiosity, and we have to, we troubleshoot everything and we try to come from every angle. Whereas kids just fall into the arms of the medicine in a different way.
I would agree. Kids are relatively pure in that sense,
Yeah.
overly mentalized like a lot of adults. Except that, of course, in my case, I deal with a lot of kids who can't speak, and I have to rely on the parents. But I very much rely on observation. And I'm glad you brought this up because I want to explain a little bit about how I practice. Since I often can't speak to these children, a lot of it is observation, and a lot of it is very, very, very careful case history, as well as looking at photos of the child, baby photos,
Oh, yes.
and then as the child progresses. And that, I kind of figured this one out on my own, actually, because I kept seeing children and I kept noticing certain patterns. And I had also read there are some things we look for, like there are clues we know that are associated with certain remedies that are known in the materia medica. And I started to see certain patterns over and over again in children, particularly children on the autism spectrum, including certain shapes of the head, certain hair patterns, certain kinds of eyelashes, things like that. So I started to ask parents to provide photos of their children, newborn, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and then once a year after that. And that has been surprisingly helpful. It's really up my accuracy, actually, a lot.
Can you talk about a case where that just opened
Absolutely.
things up? Yeah.
Actually, I'm teaching a class at the moment to other professionals, and I prepared a lot of information, and we saw a very interesting case on Saturday, and I will use that one as an example. So this is a little girl who had never had a vaccination until she was 8 years old. And they're from Germany, and the government mandated the measles vaccine for school attendance. So the child got one single vaccine, measles only, because over there you can get them separately, at 8 years old. She immediately got very sick, and within less than a month developed seizures, focal seizures, which means only one side of her body was involved. And over the next several months to a year, the seizures became worse, and she had a couple of MRIs, which showed that she has an unusual type of encephalitis on only one side of her brain. It's quite rare, but it's very serious, and the doctors want to remove half her brain.
What?
Yeah.
I didn't know they did that anymore.
Believe it or not.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. So this case came to me, I had put out a call for volunteer families who wanted to participate as volunteers in my program, because I'm taking live cases with my group of practitioners. It's like an all-day class, and I wanted to take live cases and show them how to manage the cases by having follow-ups moving forward, okay? So this case came to me through a referral from another practitioner, and I looked at it and I said, yes, that's a good case for the group. Okay. So the mom sends me all the baby photos, and I took the case and I showed the baby photos to the group, and you could see when the child was born, actually, I might have shown them the pictures before I took the case.
Mhm.
Even in the newborn photo, you could see that the child was burdened in some way. The baby looked as if she was suffering emotionally, actually. And that continued. So there's a very interesting backstory to this case, which
Yeah.
is, when the mother was 5 months pregnant, a horrible tragedy happened. Her husband and 7 members of his family were in a terrible car crash. And everybody died except for her husband, but he was badly injured and he was in a coma for a couple of months. This happened when the mother was pregnant, 5 months pregnant.
Oh my gosh.
So no wonder the child already looked like she was burdened. Now, fast forward 5 years, okay? So this problem with the vaccination happened when she was 8 months old. A couple years earlier, something happened. She was sick and she had a high fever and she was hallucinating and she saw demons, and she thought her mother was about to give her to the demons.
Oh, poor child.
Okay, so here we are trying to connect all the bits and pieces, all right?
Yes.
Now, with these seizures too, the child sometimes sees spirits, like a couple of ghosts, and she sees them leaving. So the child sees things, she sees things, she also has auditory auras, meaning that she hears things that others don't hear.
Mhm.
She has the seizure situation now, which was triggered by the vaccines, but something was going on before. So a couple years earlier, she has this situation where she thinks the mother is handing her over to the devils, okay?
Mhm.
The mother has this tragic accident when she's pregnant. The child, besides having seizures, is very clingy and she feels like she's not being loved. Okay. Now, I said, okay, said to the group, look at this child, look at the pictures. We know she was burdened. It could have come from the trauma the mother had with the pregnancy and the loss, all the grief that happened. But I said, let's go a little bit farther. Tell me about the child's father. What about his life?
Mhm.
Okay, now this is getting even more interesting.
Mhm.
When I'm taking a case, I look at all of those different aspects. So the backstory was, when the father was 4 years old, his mother, she had an unusual occupation that involved a lot of travel. She handed the 4-year-old boy to an older daughter who was already married and living in the city,
Mhm.
so that the boy would get an education, because the mom was in the country and anyway there weren't any schools. Okay, so the boy at 4 years old is separated from his mother and given to his older sister, who didn't really want him, and she mistreated him.
Oh my.
And he suffered for many years under her. Okay. Okay. So all those bits and pieces we now have to connect. And in the child's, that's why I was looking at the child's photos and the entire backstory. And essentially, the child had the delusion of being handed to the devil.
Oh,
Right?
what?
But
Yes.
that's the feeling probably her father had when he was given to the devil, meaning her sister, because her sister who treated him very badly.
Oh my goodness.
And all those bits and pieces I've had to connect. And I know the remedy exactly that the child needs. And she's already having a response to it now.
Amazing. Can you share what the remedy is?
The remedy is called stramonium, and it's one of the most commonly used remedy in my practice. So what I'm alluding to with this is that the baby photos may show certain aspects of the case. if the child already looks like they're burdened emotionally when they're born, something must have happened, either in the pregnancy, labor and delivery, or in the life of the parents before, okay? Of course, I'm also looking at other things. I'm looking at the shape of the head and so on. And that can point to infections that ancestors had, especially tuberculosis. This comes up a lot in the background of the autism kids. And when they have, you can see it by looking at, these kids will have unusually large heads, especially the upper part of the head. They often have very nice hair, lots of hair, and it may go down a little bit lower. They may have a lower hairline. They may have very nice full eyebrows and absolutely gorgeous eyelashes. Okay? Those are all clues that the child might have a family history of tuberculosis. And when that happens, those children may have a more reactive immune system. And when they get the usual vaccines, because vaccines, of course, stimulate the immune system, which is what they're supposed to do. But if the immune system is at an aggravated state and you're stimulating it too much, it can potentially turn into an autoimmune inflammatory response. And with autism, there are a lot of aspects of autoimmunity and inflammation involved.
Crazy.
Right.
It's a brilliant discovery on your behalf.
Well,
I must say, I mean, you have the power of observation beyond, like, as long as I've known you, it's, yeah, that's your brilliance. I mean, it really is. And I'm not just trying to make you feel good. I've seen it, I've observed it, and listened to your work in the time we've known each other. And it's mind-boggling. And your brain has a different way of seeing things, which has led you to this incredible, shall we call it discovery, or unveiling of the deeper reasons for why things go sideways. You know, it's I used to teach autistic kids, and with reference to them looking and being different, that goes without saying, and it's so subtle. Those eyelashes, for one, I remember just being a 20-something-year-old and working with these kids, and I'm going, they're just like these beautiful, their eyes are so beautiful, and the lashes, and I don't remember the head being larger, but I remember the perfection in the face. And I don't know if that's something you see. As much as they're encumbered, there's something very innocent about the face.
Oh, there often is, because obviously these children, they're a little bit more in their own world. They haven't been, in some ways, as you can maybe put it, as influenced or maybe changed from their basic nature in some ways as other children. So there is that aspect of them that's definitely there. They are burdened in other ways, right? Because their perception and their immune system and all those things have been altered in a way by all these different impacts. Yeah. I mean, I'm not the only one who's doing this kind of work, but I think in some ways maybe I'm reaching back a little more than some other practitioners. So I'm looking more at what happened. Okay, essentially there are sort of three aspects to really becoming a human in a way. Everything that happened before we were born, including to our ancestors, and you can also consider maybe past lives and so on if you want to go in that direction. Then whatever happened during pregnancy, labor, and delivery while the body was being built, and then whatever happened after the child is born, right? And that's how we become who we are. And it's not a new concept that the so-called sins of the fathers affect future generations. And we have also known about this in homeopathy. But I started to pay more and more and more attention to these things, because what I noticed with seeing the autism kids is that a great number of them have these extremely traumatic family histories. I can't tell you how many times I hear just shocking stories. You know, yesterday I was talking to one mom. her child, another one of those dramatic situations. She has a boy on the autism spectrum, and he had an adverse reaction already after the 4 months vaccine. So he had the 2nd month's vaccine, and then when he received his 4 months vaccines, he developed severe seizures to the point that the doctors gave up on him, like he would just not get better. And they had him on steroids. He blew up. You should see the pictures his mother sent me. He looked like a miniature sumo wrestler, you know, like he was so, he had gained so much weight from the steroids. And the mother ultimately actually healed or started to heal him by giving him CBD oil. And then they came to me. But the background story is quite interesting. It includes the child's great grandfather, having been in prison in, I think it was in Russia, and escaping a number of times. And at one point, he escaped and he was running through the woods, and he actually ended up getting bitten by a wolf.
Oh my goodness. Really?
Yeah, and I think actually that bite, something transferred, and I am now giving the child a remedy that had something to do with this whole experience of being imprisoned and escaping and being recaptured and having been bitten by the wolf and all of that as well. This was a couple generations before. So it's quite fascinating, you know?
So is it one remedy that you give, or are you giving the plethora?
No, this poor child, he was in a lot of trouble. Like one of the first remedies I gave him was a remedy for the current symptoms, which included a lot of horrible screaming. Like this child would suddenly scream very, very loudly for no apparent reason, 50 to 100 times a day. At extreme volume, okay? And he had severe meltdowns. At the point when I saw him, the seizures were controlled, but he had these other symptoms. So I gave him a remedy for that, which has worked very, very well. And then we had to start cleaning up all the drugs that he had to treat the seizures. And now we're working with the vaccines he had that triggered the seizures. But in the process, he has developed other symptoms which point to other effects, and they need to be addressed with other remedies. So these cases often need 50, 60 remedies over a period of a couple of years.
So you're peeling things back.
Yes.
As one settles, then you have an entryway to the next layer.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so you had another one to share?
Oh, I'll tell you one more.
Okay.
I could tell you stories all day.
Yay.
This mom brings in, or via Zoom, actually, my practice has gone international now, and I have clients from all kinds of countries around the world. So anyway, she comes in with this 9-month-old baby who has chronic constipation from birth, okay? And her speech is not coming, and the mom happened to be like a language or speech pathologist. She was already tuned in that the child wasn't babbling. So anyway, the child got a hepatitis B vaccine when she was born, as most children do in some countries. And I just gave a remedy made from the Hep B vaccine, and the constipation resolved like in a matter of a couple of weeks, basically. So that had been caused from the hepatitis B vaccine. She had been constipated from birth. All right, that problem was solved. And the speech wasn't coming really, so I started giving her another remedy made from other vaccines for that. Okay, good. Fast forward 9 months, the child is 18 months old, and the mom contacts me because she's extremely clingy and flips out if the father comes near the mother and wants to give her a kiss or a hug. She's super jealous. Same when the mom wants to talk to another child or other people. The child has meltdowns. She's beyond jealous, okay? Okay, I said, look, I said, there's a background story here. Tell me about your life. Okay, good. So mom tells me, yes, well, you know, I've struggled with jealousy my whole life. And when I was a child, I had this horrible fear that my mother was going to die and leave me. Really? And what happened? But something bad happen? No, nothing bad happened. I said, okay. And she said, well, my mother also had a fear that her mother was going to die. I'm like, oh, this is getting more interesting by the minute. Now we have 3 generations. Talk to your mother, find out what else happened. Okay, good. Next appointment, she says, you won't believe what happened. My mother's father, when he was 4 years old, his mother died.
Oh my gosh.
She died of tuberculosis, no less. And number 2, his brother was given away to another family.
Oh dear God. So that imprinted through the generations.
That's my theory. I can't explain it any other way.
Wow. And I sit with that and I think, do you need to? You know what I mean? Like sometimes it's so clear. It is what it is.
Right?
There's no scientific explanation necessarily.
I mean, I could have solved the case without this background information because the symptoms were pretty clear.
Yeah.
I gave a remedy and it's helping, okay? Even without the background story. But it's helpful to have the background story because it may give you more data. Homeopathy is essentially about data analysis. You get a whole bunch of data, everything you can imagine. Like it's so detailed. There could be hundreds of points of data, okay? And then that gets sorted out and shaken up and analyzed down to the most essential things. You try to find remedies that correspond to that data. And then when you do it right, the problem will improve for sure.
Wow. That's why I love homeopathy so much. Like if that's one of the career choices that, you know, was on the radar for me. Just never happened that way, but it has such brilliance unto itself. And it's about being like incredible curiosity and being a detective and knitting it all together in profound ways.
Exactly. Okay, let me tell you another story.
Okay.
So everybody has prenatal ultrasounds, right? Well, over the last couple of years, I had a few cases where I thought the child might have been injured by prenatal ultrasounds. And I started to use a remedy made from prenatal ultrasound, which I didn't know existed until a colleague of mine shared this information with me. I'm reading the information from approving. Approving is when people volunteer to take a remedy or make a remedy to see what it does to them, okay? And then we have very interesting data which goes into our database. All right. So I'm reading this proving, and it's all about feeling invaded and as if on speed, as if they've had too much coffee. They can't stop moving. They feel like they have to walk all the time. They want to escape. They don't know who they are. They want to withdraw within themselves because their senses are overstimulated. Well, what does that remind you of? Hyperactivity, autism, all the children on the, I mean, almost without exceptions, one of the main concerns the parents of the autistic kids have is that they're so hyperactive and they can't concentrate on anything. Okay, so here I am. I started to use a remedy made from ultrasound, and you'll probably wonder how the heck they made that. Well, this is the esoteric, interesting part about homeopathy. Somebody took an ultrasound probe, immersed it in a container of water, and sent some of the water to a homeopathic pharmacy to make into a remedy. Sounds like it couldn't be possible, but it is. So we have this absolutely amazing remedy made from ultrasound. Okay. This child comes in, was brought in, a little girl on the autism spectrum, 3.5. And during the first session, this was a distance case, the mom followed the child the whole time with the cell phone. The child never stopped moving for more than 10 seconds. She went from here to there, all over the house, touching something here, moving a little item, moving somewhere else. moving somewhere else, touching something, sitting down, getting up, like non-stop. And she would just do stations, like the whole house over and over and over, totally in her own world, just going around in circles. Okay. I said to her, I think your child needs a remedy made from ultrasound. All right. She gets the remedy made from ultrasound. Boom. That child started sitting down.
Oh, dear God.
And within a very short time, like within 2 weeks, that child was sitting. She could concentrate on things. She stopped moving aimlessly around the house. And then something happened that was really interesting. She suddenly started painting.
Ooh.
That little girl at 3.5 was painting with actual paints and a paintbrush. And the mom sent me the photos of her paintings. And they were absolutely stunning.
Oh my gosh.
And then we noticed that whenever she needed another dose of ultrasound, she stopped painting. Mom gives ultrasound, she paints. And it was beautiful. So this little girl, okay, she was on ultrasound first. And of course, she had every vaccine you can imagine and Tylenol and everything else. So little by little, we worked her through some of these other remedies, and she had some support remedies as well. And it's 1.5 years later, and this child has recovered by 98%. She is basically completely fine now.
And if you're not convinced by that, by those results, oh my gosh. So can I just ask this?
Of course.
You know, people have an interesting perception or preconceived notion of homeopathy. So sometimes when you mention homeopathy, there's already a belief that that's hogwash, it doesn't work. Same with my work, you believe it or you don't, and until you experience it. So are the parents the hardest people to convince that this would be helpful, or is it that they show up in your office and seeking your expertise when there are no answers anywhere?
Well, people are searching, and the word's gotten out. There are all these different groups on Facebook and so on.
Yeah.
And that's how people mostly find me, actually. From it's almost all word of mouth. And people find me. They were looking at homeopathy. They found some Facebook group, and they were asking, can you recommend a good practitioner? And that's how they find me. So most of the people that find me with these kinds of kids, I don't have to convince them, like
Yeah.
they know what they're getting themselves into. They may not know the exact details, but they've already heard from other parents that homeopathy helped their children.
Mm-hmm.
That this particular kind of homeopathy I'm using, which is more than just constitutional homeopathy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because constitutional is good. I use it too. But now, and I'm not the only one using this kind of method by far, like there are many other people doing it too. But we are all now using, the ones that are working with this system, we're using all these other remedies, like I mentioned, in addition, because there's so many layers involved.
Mm-hmm. With that knowledge that's out there now, and you've made reference to vaccines and how they can impact how it goes for children and everyone. Has your practice changed over the last, let's say, 3.5 years?
Well, I see children on the spectrum now that have been affected by the COVID vaccines, if that's what you're looking
alluding to.
Yes, in fact, I have a couple of children under my care who either developed autism or whose autism was contributed to probably by their parents and grandparents shedding spike protein. And I've actually given them a remedy made from spike protein, which helped them. Yeah.
It seems possible.
I mean, the proof is in the pudding. The nice thing about homeopathy is when it comes to the question of, let's say we're wondering what impacted a particular child, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have a list of potential suspects because we know from the medical history that the child was maybe exposed to, prenatal ultrasounds, maybe the mother was induced with Pitocin, Maybe she had the epidural on for 20 hours, but can happen sometimes. And that's full of fentanyl, which isn't a good thing.
It is. I didn't know that.
Yeah, epidurals, fentanyl and bupropion.
Oh, man.
So I have seen children, okay, if the epidural is on for more than 5 hours, that for sure it's transferring. I mean, it transfers to the child, everything transfers to the child. The nice thing about epidurals is that it stays mostly in the space, right? And the between the vertebra, and I forget the exact name of the space now. So it doesn't necessarily leak into the general circulation right away. But we know that if it's for more than 5 hours, you can find fentanyl in the infant. And I have treated, or I have treated, we're not even allowed to say that word. I have used fentanyl, homeopathic morphine for children where I was suspicious that they had been exposed because of the epidural, with excellent results.
The curiosity I have around that, and first of all, I'm in awe of what homeopathy can do to unwind these things. My curiosity is when it is not removed or neutralized or removed, or can't quite find the right word, but you know what I mean. So when we don't do that, is that child still looking for fentanyl and it has more of a chance of being an addict down the road?
Maybe. I'll tell you a little story of a case that actually happened like that. So this was a little girl. I've seen her maybe a year, 2 years ago. The main complaint, she was 4 years old, was that she was very aggressive towards her baby sister and showed no remorse. So she would intentionally try to hurt the child by stepping on her hands and feet, pinching her, scratching, hitting her, hugging her too hard. The mom couldn't take her eyes off the baby for a moment, and the sister would come and try and hurt the baby, okay? And zero remorse. I'm looking at the baby photos. Here comes the baby photos again. And the child didn't smile until she was 9 months old. No smiles, no giggles. Her baby photos looked like mugshots. Just like a mugshot, like very serious, kind of, you know what I mean? I'm like, wow, that something happened already when, the child was born like this. Okay, something happened. All right. The backstory was, it was a really terrible story, actually. So the mom, during the delivery, she had the epidural on for a long time. I forget how many hours, but much longer than she should have. And then I think she ended up with a C-section. And all kinds of terrible things happened. Like there were a number of complications. And then the mom, after the surgery or after the delivery, they wouldn't give her any food. So they starved her. She was in labor for like 20 hours. She wasn't allowed to have anything to eat. She was crying from hunger. Then after the delivery or C-section, I'm sorry, I forget which one happened now, but either way, she was left in a recovery room, freezing cold, hungry. They refused to give her a blanket. There was a nurse in the room. The mom asked for a blanket. She was refused. So she was just lying there all by herself. The child was separated for whatever reason. She was by herself, cold, freezing, nobody helping her. She developed post-traumatic stress from the delivery, okay? This was some of the background story. The big thing that stood out with this case was the aggression of the child, the trauma the mom had, the length of the epidural, and that the child had no remorse. And I knew from the materia medica that the morphine remedies have no remorse. And when you think about
what, can you tell us about that?
Okay, well, you know how morphine and heroin addicts they will do anything to get the drug, right?
Yeah.
They may do terrible things, criminal things. They may lie. That's part of the drug effect, right? The addiction, okay? And they may not have any remorse. It's a known thing. From a homeopathic point of view, morphine is associated with lying and a lack of remorse. Okay. So I pieced this all together and I gave the child, I was debating between fentanyl, because that's what was in the epidural, obviously, and a remedy made from morphine. Fentanyl, as you know, is a synthetic opioid, okay? It's related to heroin, morphine, and opium. All right. So I debated a little bit and I ended up giving homeopathic morphine. It's known as morphinum. And the results were absolutely smashing. The child recovered completely. She stopped being aggressive to her baby sister and she started to play with her normally, and she started showing remorse and normal feelings, and she became much softer. Now, we're not done yet. There was a background story, which was that the child's mother, had a very traumatic life, and she became an opioid drug prescription more or less user and more or less addict. Okay, so because of the mother's mother, the child's grandmother, had been using these things, but probably after her daughter was born. But there was this red thread, if you know what I mean, right? So there was a lot of trauma, right? I mean, why do people become addicts? It's usually has something to do either with terrible trauma, they're trying to medicate themselves, and or they had some kind of surgery and had to deal with pain. They got on opioid medications and they can't get off. Either way, it's trauma, right? And pain, physical, mental, emotional. Okay. And so there was this element, this probably already was already passed on to the mother. The mother had this horrendous, absolutely horrendous delivery, terrible recovery. And then her daughter, again, she had this state, which was then ultimately resolved with this remedy made from morphine.
Wow.
Well, interesting stories, right?
It gives reason to pause and really truly acknowledge and honor what homeopathy does. And yeah, it just blows my mind.
And what we're doing to those poor kids.
Oh, do you know, and what comes up for me too is, like, in the birth of my children, it was all C-section. Who knows what the heck they did? You know, there weren't ultrasounds back then. I don't even recall when ultrasounds were like what you did when you were pregnant. I don't know how far back that goes, but I feel fortunate, like not even knowing a lot about it, but I feel fortunate that I didn't even have to make that decision.
Right.
What we are just leaning into and accepting as just modern medicine, let's have a look inside, can have so many consequences.
Terrible. I cannot tell you how often I use the ultrasound remedy now. Let me tell you that story. Okay, here, I'll tell you another one. So this child is brought in. Hang on, this is actually a case from my. I see a lot of children, like a lot of times children are brought in because of aggressive behavior. Okay. So this little child is brought in. This was in November of 2021. 3-year-old girl, consultation. The mother reported that her daughter had developed increasingly severe behavioral issues. She says, ever since she was born, she hasn't been the easiest baby. She was colicky for the first 8 months and has always cried a lot, especially during her first 2 years. Over the last year, we have seen her develop into a very bright, helpful, intelligent, happy young girl when everything is going her way. But as soon as we say no to something or ask her to do something that she does not want to do, get dressed, brush teeth, wash hands, etc., she often has a major meltdown. Okay? So escalates into flopping on the floor. She starts slapping herself on the thigh or slapping mom or dad or slapping whatever's around. She has started to throw things. She aggressively says she does not want to do that. Then she starts screaming at the top of her lungs until she's literally red in the face. The mother says, frankly, it's quite scary to watch, and it breaks my heart to see so much anger in her over something that seems so small. Okay? The fits happen multiple times a day, every single day. She's very particular, needs everything to be exactly as she says, or there's a terrible meltdown. She also is not affectionate. She doesn't like to be hugged, kissed, or cuddled. She's very independent will tell us, I don't need you.
Whoa.
This is the story, all right? No, this is what happened. I'm saying, all right then, what happened? Okay, backstory. So the mother had a number of ultrasounds. The child was born like that, right? So if the child is already born like this, again, I'm looking for anything. Is the child born like this, or were they fine the first 18 months and then something happened, they descended into autism or whatever? But this child, she was born, she had difficulty, she couldn't sleep, she was cranky, colicky, and now she has these tantrums. Okay. So she had a whole bunch of ultrasounds, including a longer anatomy scan. Now they're doing these anatomy scans. Like,
Wow.
what happened? I'll tell you quickly. Around 1991, the autism epidemic started to really take off. And 3 things happened around that time that are likely major contributing factors. Number 1, the vaccine schedule was doubled and then tripled. Okay, because the
Whoa.
government gave the vaccine makers a free pass in 1986 and relinquished them of all liability responsibility. So you couldn't sue them anymore for any damages the vaccines did to the kids. So that caused a gold rush for the vaccine makers, because now they couldn't be sued, it didn't matter. And the government recommended or mandated all these vaccines. So it was a good thing. They decided to make more vaccines, and there we go. It doubled and then tripled. All right, number 1. Number 2, the FDA, for some reason, allowed the output of ultrasound devices to be increased 8-fold.
What?
Yes, in 1991. So here we had ultrasound. Like you said, I can't remember, I don't know when they first started using ultrasounds for prenatal. I know I had one, my daughter she's 25, and I know I had a couple when she was a baby. Okay, so anyway, 1991, whoop, all of a sudden, the ultrasound device output is much higher. Number 3, glyphosate. They started using glyphosate, and these curves are like correlated. Anyway, so here we are. The child had a bunch of ultrasounds, and then the mom tells me, and I say to her, I suspect the ultrasounds. She tells me, I also worked with ultrasounds professionally when I was pregnant with my daughter.
Right.
She was an ultrasound technician. She was using ultrasound every day in her work. Okay, I'm like, all right, tick, 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 check mark. She also had a difficult birth. All right, here we are. I gave ultrasound 30C, 2 doses a week for 2 weeks. First follow-up, 2 weeks later, mom report. After she took the first dose of ultrasound, she got sleepy and put herself down to sleep. That has never happened before.
My goodness.
She woke up, she was grumpy and had some extra tantrums for the next 4 days. That can happen. Sometimes, symptoms can get a little worse before they get better, right? Since then, she has been much less irritable and more affectionate, and lets me hug her and stroke her.
Oh.
She also cuddled on the sofa with Daddy.
What?
Oh, this child was also tripping a lot. She was tripping over her feet a lot. Okay. And she says she's not tripping over her feet quite as much as before. When she had the initial aggravation for 4 days, she was falling a lot more and ran into the wall 2-3 times. This week has been much better, even though we've been home all week. We can get her into the car seat now without any problems. Before, she was fighting us every time.
Oh,
She's
my.
also willing to go on the potty now. Before, we had to hold her down to sit on the toilet, and she was still trying to get away. She has only fought us a couple of times since the remedy. Wow.
That's success. Oh my.
Doses. She had she had 2 weeks, 4 doses of this little remedy. All right. So anyway, she continued to do very, very well for quite a while. And a few months later, the mom gets in touch with me and she says, something's I need to talk to you again. Something's different now about my little daughter. Now what happened? Okay. Now she's super clingy to her father. She won't leave his side. If daddy has a shower, she's standing in front of the shower crying.
Oh,
You remember what happened at the beginning?
yeah.
I don't need you.
Yes.
I need you. I don't want to hug. I don't want to be kissed. I don't want to be cuddled. Now she can't get enough, especially with her father. Okay, now what happened? Okay, so some other thing came up. She's like super clingy all of a sudden. All right, tell me about your life. She feels like separation anxiety now. Okay. The background story was when the mother was 11 years old, her mother became an alcoholic and became no longer available to her daughter and the other child. So the siblings started taking care of themselves and their mother. They basically lost their mother. Okay. I ended up giving a remedy made from mother's milk, which we often need when there has been an abandonment and a disruption of the mother and child bond. And again, the child totally improved and she became much more balanced, and this excessive clinginess stopped and she was much more balanced. Okay. So, again, we have to always look at several different areas. The ultrasound remedy was dramatic. And look at what we're doing. We have all these kids with ADD, ADHD. I'm telling you, the ultrasounds have something to do with it. That and the vaccines. Okay. The hyperactivity, the lack of focus, those kinds of things, I think the ultrasounds are a big contributing factor. And with homeopathy, we can prove it. So if we're suspecting that a certain substance might have affected a person, we can give it in homeopathic form. If it does nothing, it happens to me all the time. I'm thinking, maybe this thing caused something. We give the remedy and nothing happens. Well, that didn't affect the child. Next, Or sometimes, let's say the child has 10 symptoms. You give remedy A. Good, 2 things got better. 1 thing, 5 things didn't change. And there's a new symptom. All right. Now we have to recalculate. It's like your GPS. Rerouting, recalculate.
Yeah.
Turn around, go this way. Then we need a different remedy from some other impact or some other thing that happened in that child's history. And little by little, we just undo it a little bit at a time. Once you get a basic idea, it's not that difficult,
So the process itself may be quickly remedied, yet it may take years.
Well, depending on the complexity of the case and the age of the child, right? So if I have an 8-year-old child with severe autism, it's probably going to take 3-4 years or longer. If I have a 19-month-old child, I just got one new case on Saturday. He's only 19 months old. That child is probably going to be pretty much recovered within a year. Okay, right? And it's a pretty straightforward kind of case. But the more severe the symptoms, the more things the child were impacted by, and the older they are, the longer it tends to take. But they can get better. My oldest child, or actually more like man, person on the spectrum under my care right now, is 39 years old.
Oh.
And he has gotten so much better.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, beautiful. I can't believe how much better he's gotten. This poor guy, he used to sit on the toilet almost every night for most of the night biting and hitting himself in frustration. And he had all kinds of problems with bowels, right? Which is a common problem in the autism community. So, background story, he had vaccines when he was a child. Like, he's my oldest autism person. Anyway, I suspected he had DPT and MMR when he was a child. All right, so I'm giving him homeopathic DPT vaccine. Within 2 weeks, he stopped biting and hitting himself. He no longer injured himself. He was still sitting on the toilet, getting less and less extensive and no more self-injury in 2 weeks. And then little by little, over the last 9 months, he's been under my care for 9 months now, this has completely settled down. The father used to have to give him enemas. He doesn't have to do that anymore. He can have, most of the time, he has bowel movements fairly easily now. And he's not needing to sit on the toilet all night. Once in a blue moon, he sits on it for a few hours at night, okay? And he has become much more communicative and much happier. He is singing. He is now pointing out, he lives with his dad. He's now pointing out to his dad certain things. Let's say if they go out for a walk, the son might point out, "Oh, Dad, watch out, there's some dog poop over there." He helps the dad, things like that. And so that's a really great, he's a lovely man, actually, and he has a musical talent, and he loves to sing and dance and so on, and he's really lovely. And the father is absolutely lovely too, and I just love them anyway. It's so wonderful to see how much better he's gotten in only 9 months. And there is more recovery, more improvement to be had. Imagine. And all this time, from the vaccines he had when he was like a baby to 39, he was stuck. The system was stuck in that state. And now, even now, after all this time, okay, giving a remedy to unblock that blockage, that's what I mean by these blockages, okay? We just remove that little blockage, or helping to remove at least, and now the energy can flow more normally. The tendency of the organism is always towards healing. We are self-healing organisms. So if it gets a chance, it will heal. We can heal ourselves.
100%.
Right?
It's a beautiful, beautiful area. It's so deep. It's unbelievable. And you spend so much time studying the nuances of it. I mean, that's what you do.
That's my life. I mean, I enjoy
your life
much, right?
Yeah, it really does give you joy.
There's
so much satisfaction from uncovering things and tracing things.
Right.
I'm excited for people to hear this, because if ever you had doubts about homeopathy, wow, you might be well convinced now. And so you see mostly autistic children, ADD, those kinds of kids. That's the focus of your practice, more so than seeing someone with, the general nuances that come along for people.
So my practice is pretty much restricted to children at this point.
Okay.
I do see adults once in a while. Okay, it depends on the situation. And right now I'm booked out for until the new year. I mean, I have to. I can only take a couple of new cases a week because it's so involved. Like, it takes hours and hours to analyze these cases, as you can imagine. And unfortunately, now I'm booked up for like 3 months or so. But if people can wait. And now I'm training a whole bunch of other practitioners. So hopefully there'll be many other, there are many other good practitioners out in the world as well. I'm not the only one who's doing this by any stretch, but a lot of the other ones are also booked up, and nobody's really teaching the system. So I am now officially teaching, and I launched this course. We started last Saturday. I had a full class with 20 participants from all around the world. We had people there from all over Canada, the UK, the US, Germany, the Australia, Israel, and Hong Kong.
Wow.
And everybody was there together, the clients too. So there were a couple of volunteer families from these countries, and then all the different practitioners. There were a couple of parents on there as well. And here we are from all around the world trying to learn together how to help these kids.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It was so much fun actually for me. A little work too, but
Of course.
so I'm happy to be able to pass this on because there's such a need for help. As you can see, it's all pretty straightforward. Like you can help these kids. You know, the autism is exploding. The numbers are going up every single year. In some areas of the world, it's 1 in 10 boys.
Oh. Mostly boys.
It's mostly boys. I have almost all boys under my care, very few girls. What I noticed, this may be of interest to the listeners. Now, I've seen maybe in the last 10, 11 years, maybe 1,000, 1,200 or so kids, okay? Not just spectrum, but mostly spectrum and related. The related situations are similar too, you know, could be speech delays or these aggression issues and so on, like I just mentioned. And they're almost all boys. The autism is almost all boys, very few girls. So maybe I had like 1,000 boys and 20 girls, right? Why? And what I noticed that is that with the girls who end up on the spectrum, that they had an unusually large number of prenatal ultrasounds.
Oh, we're back to ultrasounds.
And I noticed that because, you know, you see so many of, after a while, you see patterns, right?
Yes.
So maybe 70, 80% of the girls on the spectrum that I've seen had between 8 and 10 prenatal ultrasounds.
That's a lot. Is that, well, that's like once a month.
There might have been some kind of an issue. Sometimes there is some complication, right? Like they're trying to monitor something, the baby isn't growing, or maybe there's an issue with the placenta, things like that, right? There's sometimes a medical reason for it. And that's when I noticed the correlation. It's like, why? Number one, I have so few girls, so the girls are definitely, we know they're more protected, mostly because of the high estrogen levels. Baby girls have high estrogen levels in their brain, and estrogen is a neuroprotectant, so their brains are more protected. Number two, they don't get circumcised. Very sad to say, but there's a link between circumcision and autism. There's actually a whole bunch of research on this.
No.
There is. Now, you may think, okay, well, circumcision is nothing really new. That's been done in different cultures for a couple of thousand years or longer, right? Okay, it's not that so much itself. It's the Tylenol they're getting. It's the Tylenol. So when the babies get circumcised, they get a bunch of Tylenol.
So that's at the time of circumcision?
Yes, for the pain.
Oh my, they give that to babies?
Yeah, they do.
Oh my gosh.
All right. So we know there's correlation there. Okay, so why do we have so many boys on the spectrum? The brains are less protected. And I would say one of these days I have to do an analysis on all these files. I have to hire somebody to help me because I have hundreds and hundreds, you know, I have 1,000 files. We should analyze them. I would say that almost all of the boys were circumcised. And the majority of them were also induced. So the induction of labor, I think there's a big contributing factor there as well. You know, I can see the patterns, like, and we know from research, okay, I've been doing research, C-sections also can increase the risk for a number of reasons. Obviously, there's something might have gone wrong. There might be some other complication. There could be more medical intervention in terms of medications. The mom is given medication after the baby is born for pain control. It gets into the milk, etc. Right? So there can be they may not get the microbiome from the natural flora when they normally would pass through with a vaginal birth. So it could be a number of issues. But we know from research, I was just looking at a study, they were looking at, I don't know, 500,000 or something, or 2 million births in the US. And they were looking at any correlations between C-sections and autism and so on. And there is a correlation for sure. So there are different factors that can increase the risk. And then, but from a homeopathic point of view, I'm just thinking, okay, what was the child exposed to and how can we fix it? It's just cleanup. I'm just doing cleanup work all the time.
Wow. Makes me go through my children's experience. And man, you make the best decisions you can at a time.
I know, of
At-
course. What else
Yeah.
can you do?
Yeah.
Right? Same with vaccines. I mean, I never, it's not the parents' fault. They don't know. The doctors didn't know. Nobody knows because we don't even have the research to look at what happens long term to these kids when they're vaccinated because the research is not required.
Mm.
The manufacturers are not required to do long-term clinical trials or even to use placebos in vaccine safety studies.
Well, that says everything, doesn't it?
None of the vaccines on the childhood schedule, except the HPV, but that's a separate story, have
Yes.
ever been tested in long-term clinical trials, like more than a few days or weeks, and never against the placebo.
Mm.
Never. They're tested against another vaccine. So, first vaccine is put on the market, considered safe. The next vaccine, okay, half the kids get the new vaccine, the other ones get the old vaccine. Same problems in both sides, should be fine. Let's license it. That's how they license the vaccines.
Have you ever come under attack because you talk about that?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
quite a bit. In fact, well, so I don't know how much time you have, but make a long story short, I actually gave up my naturopathic license 4 years ago because our college more or less forbade us to talk about vaccines and autism. Okay.
Mm.
And that was the result of complaints that were leveled against myself and 2 of my colleagues who were using these modalities and these systems in our practice. And a complaint was filed against us, and the college actually changed their bylaws to prohibit us from. It's all legal wording, like they prohibited us from counseling parents that their child might have been vaccine injured, and that might be part of why they have autism. So I don't have to counsel anybody or convince anybody that their child was vaccine injured. The parents come to me saying, my child was vaccine injured, okay?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It was too much of a red flag, plus we couldn't have anything on our websites mentioning anything critical of vaccines whatsoever, including scientific studies, like we couldn't have it on there. So anyway, I decided to give up my license because I wasn't going to stop helping these families and abandoning them. There was no way. I was seeing these results and I was going to continue. So I just told them, look, I'm sorry, but we're not on the same page anymore. And they said to me, well, you want to continue this, your life and your career will go down in flames because you'll be painting a big red target on your back. And I said, okay, well, I guess we'll see what happens. And you know what happened? Now that I'm not restricted by having a naturopathic license, I can have an international practice, which I wasn't allowed to have before.
Oh.
As a naturopathic doctor, if you are licensed in a certain jurisdiction, like a certain province, you can only consult with people online and so on that are living in your province. And now this restriction was removed. I didn't even think of that when I gave up my license. This just all happened later. And then I kept being approached from people from the US mostly and other countries for help with their children. And anyway, after a while, I started saying yes. And now I have this absolutely international practice with clients as far away as Dubai and India, Pakistan, Australia, New Zealand, all over Europe, one in South Africa, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have been allowed to do that before. So actually, it was a bonus, and more people are getting help, and now I'm teaching, and so it was actually a really good decision. But the college definitely doesn't want us to talk about it.
No. A lot of people are leaving naturopathy because of it. It's unfortunate, but as you saw in your case, it opened a whole new door to some amazing things and broadened your practice and your exposure. It's good. It's so good. Wow.
Yeah, that's what happened.
Anke, we'll probably have to divide this into 2 sections because it's gone on longer, and it's because it's so interesting, and such incredibly valuable information. Moving forward, I wish for the listeners that they have a new love affair with homeopathy and are become really curious and apply it in their lives where it may be good to do so. And there's so much hope, regardless of what has happened and is happening. I think do parents need treatment while the children are getting treated? That's my last little question.
You know, this happens all the time. Like, I quite often recommend something for the parents.
Yeah.
Or the parents have an appointment for themselves. Sometimes things are so obvious, like I'm talking to the parent and the child, and you know, the story unfolds as I mentioned, because maybe something happened in the parent's life that might have affected their child or their grandparents. And you know, quite often I recommend something already, and it's definitely good if they can. They don't have to, but it does come up a lot. Yes.
Yes. Do they bring it up? They need something too, or would you be
Yes,
recommending?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Once I walked them through this whole process,
Yeah.
you know, now that you mention it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. You're
Yeah.
an amazing human. I
Well,
love your work. I love
thank
the
you very much.
brilliance of your mind and how you think and put things together. Thank you so
Likewise.
much.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share this knowledge about homeopathy. I just love to share it with everybody. It's so exciting. Yeah.
Well, how lucky are we?
Oh, well, thank you so much.